The bobcat wouldn't leave their porch for days. Neighbors whispered, officials warned, and fear began to spread. But when the security footage revealed everything, the truth was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. What looked like a dangerous predator was only the beginning of a far darker game. A widow fighting to keep her home, a powerful force determined to push her out, and a mystery clawing at the edge of survival where every choice could mean life or death. Why was the bobcat really there? And what secret was someone desperate enough to burn everything down to hide? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. A4. The bobcat wouldn't leave their porch for days. The security footage revealed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ida Pennington's front porch. As she pushed open her screen door, coffee mug in hand, the familiar creak of the hinges was cut short by an unfamiliar sight. That made her freeze mid-step. There, not 10 feet away, a bobcat crouched on her weathered porch boards, its tawny fur bristling and amber eyes fixed directly on her. Oh, Ida's coffee sloshed as she stumbled backward, her free hand clutching the doorframe. The wildcat didn't move, didn't run. It just stared, muscles tense beneath its spotted coat. Her heart thundered in her chest. In all her 60-plus years in Cedar Mesa, she'd never had a bobcat come this close to her house. They were usually shy creatures, steering clear of humans. But this one seemed different. There was something about its posture that spoke of determination, rather than aggression. Go on now, she called out, trying to sound firm despite her shaking voice. Shoo. This isn't your territory. The bobcat's ear twitched, but otherwise, it remained stubbornly in place. As Ida's initial shock faded, she noticed how the animal kept glancing toward the corner of the porch, near her old rocking chair. Its behavior was odd, protective almost. She set her coffee down inside and grabbed her broom, more for comfort than any real intention to use it. As she edged closer, the bobcat let out a low growl, but didn't advance. That's when she noticed its slight limp, the way it favored its right front paw. You're hurt, she murmured, her fear giving way to concern. The cat's eyes never left her, but its attention seemed divided between her and whatever it was guarding near the rocking chair. Try as she might, Ida couldn't see anything there from her current angle. The sound of a car door slamming made both Ida and the bobcat jump. A man in a tan uniform was walking up her gravel driveway, official-looking paperwork in hand. Ma'am, he called out, then stopped short when he spotted the bobcat. Step inside right now. That's a dangerous animal. The county officer's voice held authority, but Ida didn't move. It's not being aggressive, she said firmly. Something's wrong. It needs help. What it needs is animal control, the officer replied, pulling out his phone. This is a public safety hazard. I'm posting a notice. You'll need to vacate the premises until we can ensure there's no den or permanent habitat being established. Ida's stomach dropped. Vacate. This is my home standard procedure, ma'am. 48 hours to comply. He carefully placed a bright orange notice on her mailbox post, keeping one eye on the bobcat. We'll have professionals deal with the situation. Long after the officer left, Ida stood at her window, watching the bobcat. The orange notice felt like a threat, not just to her unwanted guest, but to her own security. She'd lived in this house for 40 years. No bureaucrat was going to push her out without good reason. Reaching for her phone, she called the local hardware store where she worked part-time. Jimmy, it's Ida. Remember that trail camera you were showing me last week? I'd like to borrow it, if I could. 20 minutes later, she had the camera in hand and a plan forming in her mind. She knew someone else who might help, Reed Talbot, the state biologist who'd given a talk at the library about local wildlife last month. She'd kept his card. Impressed by his obvious passion for the animals others saw as nuisances, the phone rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. Reed Talbot speaking. Mr. Talbot, this is Ida Pennington from the library talk. I've got a situation with the bobcat that won't leave my porch, and the county's threatening to evict me over it. I could use some expert advice. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. As Ida explained the bobcat's behavior and her suspicions about what it might be guarding, Reed's responses were thoughtful and engaged. He didn't dismiss her concerns or jump to worst-case scenarios like the county officer had. The limp you described could mean it's injured, but the protective behavior suggests there might be kittens involved, Reed said. Setting up that trail camera is a good idea. We need evidence of what's really going on before anyone takes drastic action. With Reed's guidance, Ida spent the afternoon positioning the trail camera. The bobcat watched her every move but seemed to understand she wasn't a threat. As she worked, she caught glimpses of the animal's face, not fierce now, but worried, almost pleading. I won't let them hurt you, she promised softly, securing the camera to the porch railing. "Whatever you're protecting, we'll figure this out together." As darkness fell, Ida sat at her kitchen table, the orange eviction notice visible through her window. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her shoulders, but she felt stronger knowing she was taking action. The trail camera was recording, Reed was on her side, and she wasn't about to let anyone push her around. Not when something bigger than a simple wildlife invasion seemed to be unfolding on her front porch. The Bobcat remained at its post as night settled in, its eyes reflecting the porch light like golden coins. Ida made herself a simple dinner and kept watch, wondering what secrets tomorrow's camera footage might reveal. One thing was certain: she wasn't leaving her home. Not when both she and that determined animal had something worth protecting. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ida's front yard when a glossy black SUV pulled into her gravel driveway. Through her kitchen window, she watched a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit step out, his leather shoes crunching on the gravel as he approached her door. The doorbell chimed, and Ida wiped her hands on her apron before answering. A polished smile greeted her. "Mrs. Pennington, Troy Haverford." He extended a manicured hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting your afternoon." Ida shook his hand briefly, noting his firm grip. "What can I help you with, Mr. Haverford?" "Please, call me Troy." He gestured to her porch. "I couldn't help but notice the county's wildlife warning posted here. Concerning situation with that Bobcat, isn't it?" Ida's eyes narrowed slightly. "The Bobcat hasn't been any real trouble." "Oh, but it could be." Troy's voice dropped with practiced concern. "Property values in this area are already sensitive. At a dangerous wildlife situation." He shook his head. "Well, it could really impact your investment here. Is that right?" Ida crossed her arms, her grandmother's stubbornness rising in her chest. "I represent Cedar Mesa Development Corporation. We're actually helping several of your neighbors avoid exactly this kind of problem." He pulled a folded document from his breast pocket. "I'd like to make you an offer on your property. Get you out from under this situation." Ida glanced at the paper but didn't take it. Not interested. "Mrs. Pennington, please consider carefully. Once word gets out about predator problems, you might not get another offer this generous." He held out the document. 30% below market value might seem low, but given the circumstances, Mr. Haverford, Ida cut him off, her voice firm but level. "This land's been in my family for 3 generations. I'm not selling. Not at market value. Not below it." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "You might want to sleep on it. Things have a way of getting worse before they get better with these wildlife situations." "Good day, Mr. Haverford." Ida shut the door firmly, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the lock. That evening, after checking that her newly installed trail camera was running, Ida sat at her kitchen table, unable to shake the unsettled feeling Haverford's visit had left her with. Something about his timing, his smooth words about the Bobcat, felt wrong. At dawn the next morning, Ida retrieved the camera's memory card with trembling fingers. Back inside, she inserted it into her laptop, the one her son had insisted on giving her last Christmas. The footage began playing, and her coffee grew cold beside her as she watched. At 2:17 in the morning, a figure appeared at the edge of her porch. The infrared lighting showed a man in work clothes and contractor boots, carefully placing something on the ground. He moved methodically, dropping what looked like bait or lure in several spots. Near her porch steps, the pungent smell she'd noticed lately suddenly made horrible sense. Horrible sense. Ida's hands clenched into fist as she watched. The Bobcat wasn't just randomly appearing. Someone was deliberately drawing it to her property. And after Haverford's visit, the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "Oh, you sneaky devil," she muttered, her voice shaking with anger. The curious incident with the Bobcat wasn't curious at all. It was a calculated scheme to pressure her into selling. The discovery made her blood boil, but it also strengthened her resolve. She wasn't about to let some smooth-talking developer chase her off her land with dirty tricks. Ida sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The trail camera footage was proof of manipulation, but she'd need more than that to fight back against whatever Haverford and his corporation had planned. This was just the beginning. She could feel it in her bones. The question was, what would they try next? She reached for her phone, determined to call Reed Talbot, the state biologist. He needed to see this footage. But even as she dialed, Ida knew this was about more than just protecting herself now. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could push around anyone who stood in their way. It was about protecting her home, her dignity, and maybe even that Bobcat that someone was trying to turn into a weapon against her. Ida's hands trembled slightly as she connected the trail camera to her ancient laptop. Reed Talbot sat beside her at the kitchen table, his presence steady and reassuring in the morning light. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but neither had touched their mugs. To focus on the task at hand, there, Ida said, double-clicking. The video file. This was taken just before midnight. The grainy footage showed her front porch in the camera's infrared glow. A figure moved into frame, dressed in dark clothes and wearing work boots. He bent down, deliberately spreading something along the edge of her porch. Reed leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "Stop it right there," he said, pointing to the screen. "Can you zoom in?" Ida fumbled with the controls until the image enlarged, though slightly blurry. The man was holding what looked like a small container. "That's a commercial trapping lure," Reed said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's a scent attractant, extremely powerful stuff. Technically, legal for licensed trappers, but using it like this." He shook his head. "This is deliberate harassment. So someone's trying to draw the Bobcat here." Ida's stomach clenched. "But why?" "To create a public safety issue," Reed explained, running a hand through his graying hair. "If they can document a dangerous animal hanging around your property, they can force evacuation measures. It's happened before in other areas facing development pressure." Ida sat back in her chair, the weight of understanding settling over her. "Troy Haverford," she said quietly, "the developer who tried to buy my place yesterday." Reed nodded grimly. "This isn't about one stubborn Bobcat anymore, Ida. Someone wants you gone, and they're willing to break the law to make it happen. I need to call Lainey," Ida said, reaching for her phone. Her daughter needed to know what was happening. 20 minutes later, Lainey's voice crackled through the speaker. "Mom, are you sure about this? It sounds pretty far-fetched." "I have it on video, honey. Reed's here right now. He's a wildlife expert. He says it's illegal baiting." "Reed?" Lainey's tone shifted slightly. "The wildlife biologist you mentioned before." "Yes, and he knows what he's talking about." Ida glanced at Reed, who was studying the footage again. "Someone's trying to force me out of my home." There was a long pause on the line. "Mom, maybe you should consider selling. If things are getting dangerous." "Lainey Marie Pennington," Ida cut in, her voice firm but gentle. "This has been our home for 40 years. Your father built this porch with his own hands. I'm not letting some developer chase me away with dirty tricks." Another pause, shorter this time. "I know, Mom. I just worry about you out there alone." Lainey sighed. "What can I do to help? Just knowing you believe me helps," Ida said, relief washing over her. "I might need you to store some copies of this evidence, just in case, of course. I'll come by this weekend." Lainey's voice softened. "Be careful, okay?" After ending the call, Ida turned back to Reed, who was making notes in a small notebook. "What do we do now?" "First, we document everything. The lure they're using, the timing, the boot prints if we can find them." Reed looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Then we start building a case. This isn't just criminal harassment. It's a violation of state wildlife regulations." Ida walked to the window, looking out at her front porch. The morning sun highlighted the worn boards, where her husband had replaced them years ago. The flower boxes she painted herself every spring. This place wasn't just property. It was the story of her life. "I always thought if I kept to myself, worked hard, did the right thing," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I never imagined someone would go to these lengths." Reed stood and joined her at the window. "That's what they count on, good people staying quiet. But sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to bullies, even when they wear expensive suits and drive fancy cars." Ida nodded, straightening her shoulders. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, and for a moment, Reed saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. This wasn't just about a Bobcat anymore, or even about one piece of property. It was about right and wrong, about standing up to people who thought they could push others around just because they had money and influence. "We'll need more cameras," Ida said decisively, "and I want to learn everything about these lures. What they look like, how they smell, where they're sold." "I'll help you set up a proper surveillance system," Reed offered, "and I'll file a report about the illegal baiting. They probably thought you'd be an easy target, a widow living alone. They didn't count on you having friends in wildlife management." Ida smiled for the first time that morning. "Or a stubborn streak a mile wide, as my late husband used to say." The sound of movement on the porch caught their attention. The Bobcat had returned, its tawny coat gleaming in the sunlight. It sat calmly, watching them through the window with amber eyes. "Look at that," Reed said softly. "She's not acting aggressive at all. This is normal territorial behavior. Nothing dangerous about it. We'll prove that too." Ida watched the magnificent creature, feeling a kinship with its stubborn presence. They were both being pushed, both refusing to give ground. And now, Thanks to Reed's expertise and Laney's reluctant support, she understood the true scope of what she was facing. Someone wanted to force her out, to erase 40 years of memories and replace them with whatever profitable venture they had planned. They thought they could manipulate nature itself to serve their greed, but they had underestimated both Ida and the wild creature they were trying to use as a pawn. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ida's kitchen table as she spread out her evidence. The trail camera footage played on her laptop while printed screenshots, and Reed's detailed wildlife reports covered every inch of the wooden surface. Her daughter Laney paced nearby, arms crossed and face pinched with worry. "Mom, are you sure about this? Going up against the county could make things worse," Laney said, stopping to lean against the counter. Ida straightened her shoulders. "I'm not letting them bully me out of my home with made-up dangers. Reed's reports prove the Bobcat's being baited here." Reed nodded, pointing to several time-stamped photos. "These clearly show someone spreading commercial trapping lure. That's legal within city limits, and it explains the Bobcat's unusual behavior." The sharp rap of knuckles on the front door made them all jump. Through the window, Ida spotted several vehicles parked in her driveway: a county code enforcement truck, an unmarked white van with Wildlife Solutions painted on the side, and a sleek black pickup she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Pennington," a loud voice called out. "This is Bryce Lathrop with Mr. Haverford's office. We need to discuss the predator situation immediately." Ida's stomach clenched, but she lifted her chin and walked to the door. Reed and Laney followed close behind us. She opened it to find 4 men crowding her porch. Bryce Lathrop stood front and center, his burly frame filling the doorway. He wore a reflective vest over his flannel shirt, work boots planted wide on her welcome mat. Behind him stood a uniformed code officer and 2 men in khaki uniforms from the Wildlife Removal Company. "Ma'am," Lathrop said, his tone falsely pleasant, "we're here to address the dangerous animal situation before someone gets hurt. Mr. Haverford is very concerned about liability. The only danger here is the illegal baiting of wildlife," Ida replied firmly. "We have proof someone's been spreading trapping lure to draw predators to my property." The code officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Pennington, we've received multiple reports of aggressive behavior. As a matter of public safety, we need to remove the animal today." "And who exactly reported this aggressive behavior?" Reed asked, moving to stand beside Ida. "I'm Reed Talbot, state wildlife biologist. I've been monitoring this situation, and I've seen no evidence of aggression, only normal territorial behavior caused by artificial attractants." Lathrop's friendly facade cracked slightly. "Listen here, the county's got procedures to follow. We don't need some tree hugger interfering with public safety measures. What we need," Ida said, "is an investigation into who's deliberately creating the situation. I have video evidence of someone trespassing on my property at night to spread wildlife lure." "Now, Mrs. Pennington," the code officer said, "making accusations without proof could be considered slander. We're here to help protect you and your neighbors." Laney stepped forward, her professional demeanor in full force. "My mother has submitted a formal request for an emergency hearing with the county commission. Until that hearing takes place, you have no authority to remove any animals from this property." "That's right," Reed added. "And I'll be testifying about the pattern of wildlife baiting we've documented. The state takes a very dim view of using banned trapping lures in residential areas." Lathrop's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, lady. Mr. Haverford was trying to help you out of a bad situation, but if you want to play hardball, you let the threat hang in the air. The only mistake," Ida said quietly but firmly, "was thinking I'd roll over and let you drive me out of my home with these underhanded tactics. Now please leave my property unless you have a court order." The wildlife removal team exchanged uncertain glances, but Lathrop stood his ground. "This isn't over. That cat's going to hurt someone, and it'll be on your head. The only thing that's going to hurt someone," Reed replied, "is the legal fallout when the scheme comes to light. I suggest you tell Mr. Haverford to prepare for some very uncomfortable questions at the hearing." Lathrop glared at them for a long moment before turning on his heel. "Let's go, boys. We'll let the county sort this out." He stalked back to his truck, the others trailing behind him. As the vehicles pulled away, Ida's hands shook slightly. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until the confrontation ended. Laney put an arm around her mother's shoulders. "You did good, Mom. But this is getting serious. They're not going to back down easily." "No," Ida agreed, watching dust settle in her driveway. "But neither am I. This is my home, and I won't let them chase me out with dirty tricks." Reed gathered their evidence from the kitchen table. "We need to make copies of everything and get your hearing request filed today. The sooner we get this in front of the commission, the better." Ida nodded. closing her front door on the morning's confrontation. She felt both shaken and stronger somehow. Seeing all that power aligned against her was frightening, but having Reed and even skeptical Laney standing beside her gave her hope. They had truth on their side, and she had to believe that would be enough when they presented their case. "I'll call the commissioner's office right now," Laney said, pulling out her phone. "We need to make sure they can't bury this request." Looking at her daughter and Reed working together to help her fight back, Ida felt a surge of gratitude. She might be up against powerful forces, but she wasn't facing them alone. Sometimes it took a crisis to show you who your real allies were. Ida stood her ground on the worn wooden planks of her porch, heart pounding as she faced down Bryce Lathrop and his wildlife removal team. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across their stern faces, highlighting the tension in the air. But something caught her attention from the corner of her eye: the bobcat's unusual behavior. The creature was limping badly now, pacing in an odd pattern near the porch steps. Its amber eyes weren't focused on the group of people at all, but rather fixed intently on something beneath the porch. Ida had seen enough injured animals in her volunteer work to recognize distress, and this wasn't the behavior of an aggressive predator. "Ma'am, we need to remove this dangerous animal immediately," Lathrop insisted, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made Ida's spine stiffen. "We have the proper equipment to handle it humanely," but Ida barely heard him. She was watching the bobcat's movements with growing concern. The animal would take a few steps forward, then retreat, its attention never wavering from whatever lay hidden beneath the porch. There was something desperate in its movements that tugged at Ida's heart. "Just give me a minute," Ida said firmly, holding up her hand to stop Lathrop's advance. She could feel the frustration radiating from the removal team, but her instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Moving slowly, careful not to startle anyone, human or feline, Ida crouched down near the edge of the porch. The bobcat watched her warily, but didn't retreat. Instead, it made a soft sound, almost like a whimper, that made Ida's chest tighten. "Mrs. Pennington, this is completely unnecessary and dangerous," the code officer warned from behind her. "We have a court order." "Shush," Ida interrupted, her focus entirely on what she was about to do. With trembling fingers, she pulled her phone from her pocket. The bobcat's eyes followed her movements, but there was no aggression in its posture, only what Ida now recognized as fear and desperation. Carefully, she stretched out on her stomach and extended her arm, sliding her phone under the porch. The screen's flashlight illuminated the darkness beneath, and what Ida saw made her gasp in horror. There, cruelly gripping tiny legs, was a steel jaw trap, and caught within its merciless grip were 2 small bobcat kittens. Therefore matted with dirt and blood, the mother bobcat's distress suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been threatening anyone. She had been trying to protect and free her babies. "Oh my God," Ida whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She quickly snapped several photos and a short video, her hands shaking with both anger and sadness. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. All this time, they'd been wrong about everything. The bobcat wasn't the threat they needed protection from. She was a desperate mother, trying to save her children from someone's deliberate cruelty. The real predators were the ones who had set these illegal traps, trying to manufacture a crisis. Ida pushed herself back to her feet, her jaw set with newfound determination. She turned to face Lathrop and his team, holding up her phone with the damning evidence clearly visible on the screen. "Here's your aggressive predator," she said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "Someone set illegal steel jaw traps under my porch and caught her kittens. She's been trying to save them this whole time." The code officer stepped forward, his face paling as he looked at the photos. Even Lathrop seemed taken aback, though he quickly tried to mask his reaction. "This changes everything," Ida continued, standing straighter. "Those traps are illegal in this county. Someone put them here deliberately, and I think we all know why." She looked pointedly at Lathrop, thinking of his connection to Haverford and the developer's desperate attempts to buy her property. The wildlife removal team members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had come prepared to deal with a dangerous animal, not evidence of criminal activity. "We'll need to call in the proper authorities," the code officer said slowly, his earlier certainty crumbling in the face of this new evidence. "This is a serious violation of wildlife protection laws." Ida nodded, already pulling up Reed's number on her phone. The state biologist would know exactly how to handle the situation and document everything properly. But even as she dialed, her attention remained on the mother bobcat, who had settled into a watchful crouch near her trapped kittens. "I'm so sorry," Ida whispered to the animal, her heart aching for the creature's suffering. "We're going to help them now. I promise." The bobcat's eyes met hers, and in that moment, Ida felt a profound connection with the desperate mother. They were both fighting against those who would harm the things they held dear. The Bobcat for her kittens, and Ida for her home and principles. This wasn't just about saving her property anymore. It was about exposing the truth and standing up against the kind of people who would deliberately harm innocent creatures to get their way. The revelation had transformed what was already a difficult situation into something far more meaningful. A fight for justice that Ida knew she couldn't walk away from. She watched as the mother Bobcat settled closer to the porch, maintaining her vigil over her trapped babies. The animal's dedication strengthened Ida's resolve. Whatever came next, she would see this through for both their sakes. The morning, after discovering the trapped kittens, Ida sat at her kitchen table with Reed and Lainey, surrounded by stacks of printed photos and laptop screens showing footage from multiple trail cameras. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the determination on their faces as they worked. "Look at this one," Reed said, pointing to a clear image of Bryce Lathrop spreading something near the porch steps. The timestamp shows 3:15 in the morning. He's wearing the same reflective vest in every shot. Every shot. Lainey leaned closer, her professional demeanor shifting to disgust. "I can't believe they'd stoop this low. Mom, we need to get this out there." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I know someone at Channel 8 News, Sarah Martinez. She's always looking for stories about corporate overreach." Ida nodded, her hands steady as she organized the photos chronologically. "Make sure she understands this isn't just about me. Those kittens are suffering because of their schemes." Reed worked on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys, as he drafted a formal complaint to the Wildlife Resources Board. "We're documenting every violation, animal cruelty, illegal trapping, harassment. Haverford's going to have a hard time explaining this away within hours." Sarah Martinez arrived with a camera crew. The young reporter's eyes widened as she reviewed the evidence, particularly the footage of the trapped kittens. "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear," she said, adjusting her microphone. "Mrs. Pennington, would you mind if we filmed right here on your porch?" The resulting news segment aired the evening during prime time. The story painted a compelling picture, a respected widow standing up to corporate bullying, complete with clear footage of Bryce Lathrop's nighttime activities, and the heartbreaking images of the mother Bobcat trying to protect her trapped babies. Social media exploded with support. Local wildlife groups shared the story, and neighbors Ida hadn't spoken to in years called to offer their backing. The tide of public opinion was turning. Troy Haverford's response came the next morning, a press conference held in front of his gleaming office building. He wore his most expensive suit and his most sympathetic expression. "We at Haverford Development have always prioritized both community safety and environmental responsibility," he announced to the gathered reporters. "While we maintain that the wildlife situation at Mrs. Pennington's property poses genuine concerns, we want to demonstrate our good faith. We're offering to fund a complete humane removal program, supervised by certified experts." Ida watched the broadcast from her living room, Reed and Lainey flanking her on the old floral couch. She noticed how Haverford never actually denied the allegations about the baiting or the traps. "He's trying to look like the hero while still getting what he wants," Reed observed, his voice tight with anger. "If we accept his help, he'll control the whole process." Lainey squeezed her mother's hand. "The public's on your side now, Mom. We can't let him twist this around." Ida sat quietly for a moment, watching a group of goldfinches at her bird feeder through the window. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm. "He thinks he can buy his way out of this, just like he tries to buy everything else. But some things aren't for sale. Not my home, not my principles, and certainly not the truth." The story continued to gain traction. More neighbors came forward with similar stories of pressure from Haverford's company. Local environmental groups offered their support, and a wildlife rehabilitation center volunteered to help with the Bobcat family once they could be safely rescued. Sarah Martinez did a follow-up story, focusing on the community's response and the pattern of developer harassment in the area. Each new piece of coverage forced Haverford to maintain his conciliatory public stance, while limiting his ability to act against Ida directly. "We've got him on the defensive," Reed said during their next strategy session. "But don't let your guard down. Men like Haverford are most dangerous when they're cornered." Ida stood at her kitchen window, watching the mother Bobcat make another careful circuit of the porch. The animal's dedication to her trapped kittens mirrored Ida's own determination to protect what mattered most. "Let him try whatever he wants," she said quietly. "We have something he doesn't. The truth on our side." The acrid smell of smoke jolted Ida from her sleep. Her heart pounded as she sat up in bed, momentarily disoriented by the orange glow flickering through her bedroom window. Then reality hit her like a physical blow. Fire. She scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor as she rushed to the window. Horror seized her chest, Her front porch was engulfed in flames. The wooden railings and floorboards that she'd painted just last spring were now crackling infernos, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. No, 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 she cried, thinking of the trapped kittens beneath. Their terrified screams pierced through the roar of the flames, driving straight into her heart. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the chaos. Reed's truck skidded to a stop in her driveway. He must have seen the flames from the road during his evening patrol. He burst from the vehicle, fire extinguisher in hand. Ida, he shouted, running toward the porch. Stay back. I've called the fire department. But Ida was already moving, driven by the desperate cries from beneath the burning porch. The heat hit her like a wall as she approached, making her eyes water. Through the gaps in the floorboards, she could see the orange reflection of flames on tiny faces. The kittens huddled together in terror. Reed tried to reach them, dropping to his stomach and extending his arm under the porch, but the space was too narrow for his broad shoulders. I can't get to them. The frustration in his voice was palpable. The trail camera. Ida suddenly remembered. The memory card contained all their evidence. Without it, they'd lose everything they'd worked for. The camera was mounted low on a porch post, already being licked by flames. Making a split-second decision, Ida dropped to her hands and knees. She was smaller than Reed. She could fit. The wooden boards above her groaned ominously as she army crawled forward. Ida, don't. Reed's voice cracked with fear. The structure's not stable. But she pressed on, feeling the heat intensify around her. Smoke burned her lungs with every breath. The kitten's cries guided her forward until her searching hands found soft fur. One by one, she gathered them against her chest. 1, 2, 3. Tiny bodies trembling with fear. A thunderous crack split the air. The porch is going. Reed shouted. Ida, now. With the kitten secure in one arm, she stretched toward the trail camera with her free hand. The plastic was hot to the touch, but she managed to pop out the memory card, clutching it tight as another crack resonated through the burning wood. Move. Reed's command galvanized her into action. She scrambled backward as fast as she could, feeling the heat intensify. Strong hands grabbed her ankles, and suddenly she was being dragged clear of the porch. They barely made it. With a deafening crash, the entire structure collapsed, sending a shower of burning debris dangerously close to the propane tank that sat at the corner of her house. If that had caught, Reed pulled her farther from the flames, his arms tight around her as they both gasped for clean air. The kittens were still clutched protectively against her chest, all three alive and unharmed despite their ordeal. Dot in the distance, sirens wailed their approach, but Ida could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart. She looked down at the tiny lives she'd saved, then at the memory card still clutched in her trembling hand. She had protected both, the innocent creatures who needed her, and the evidence that could bring justice. Reed's hand squeezed her shoulder, and when she met his gaze, she saw both relief and admiration there. That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said hoarsely, his voice rough from smoke. Sometimes they're the same thing, Ida replied, coughing, but managing a weak smile. The fire department's trucks were pulling up now, red lights painting the night in urgent flashes, as the firefighters jumped into action. Ida held the kittens closer, knowing without a doubt that she'd make the same choice again. The morning after the fire, Ida sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by evidence that could no longer be ignored. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread out the printed screenshots from her trail camera footage. The images told a damning story. Bryce Lathrop spreading bait near her porch on multiple nights, his reflective vest clearly visible in the infrared glow. Another photo showed him setting the illegal steel jaw trap. And now, saved on her phone, was security footage from her neighbor's camera showing a shadowy figure approaching her porch. Just before the fire started, "We've got him," Reed said quietly, standing beside her chair. His steady presence helped calm her racing thoughts. The timeline is irrefutable. Lainey paced behind them, her heels clicking on the kitchen floor. "Mom, the county hearing isn't for another 2 weeks. That's too long to wait. They could try something else." "I agree," said the reporter, Sarah Chen, who sat across the table taking notes. She'd arrived early that morning after hearing about the fire. This is the moment to strike, while public sympathy is high and the evidence is fresh. Ida's jaw tightened as she looked at the charred remains of her porch through the kitchen window. The Bobcat and her kittens were safe now, transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center by Reed. But the violence of the attack had shaken Ida to her core. They'd nearly killed those innocent creatures, and could have killed her too if the fire had reached the propane tank. "I'm done waiting for them to come after me," Ida said, her voice firm. "It's time we take this fight to Haverford himself." Reed pulled up a chair beside her. "What are you thinking?" Haverford's hosting that big community meeting tomorrow night at the Cedar Mesa Country Club. He's presenting his plans for the new development. Ida's eyes sparked with determination. Everyone who matters in town will be there. Perfect timing, Sarah said, leaning forward. I can have my camera crew there. If you're ready to go public with everything, that's the ideal venue. They spent the next several hours carefully piecing together the evidence. Reed's expertise helped establish the illegal nature of the baiting and trapping. Lainey, with her office skills, organized the timeline into a clear sequence showing the escalation of events. Sarah provided guidance on how to present the story in the most compelling way. Look at this, Reed said, pointing to a detail in one of the nighttime photos. The code officer's truck is visible in the background while Bryce is setting the trap. He was there, watching it happen. Ida felt a chill. The conspiracy went deeper than she'd initially thought. How many others are involved? That's what we'll find out, Lainey said, squeezing her mother's shoulder. Once this goes public, people will start talking. They created a devastating presentation, combining the trail camera footage with documents showing the pattern of harassment. Sarah helped them edit it down to its most powerful elements: the deliberate baiting, the cruel trap, the code officer's complicity, and finally, the arson attempt that could have turned deadly. As evening approached, Ida felt the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow night, she would stand up in front of Cedar Mesa's most influential citizens and expose the corruption that had nearly cost her everything. The thought made her stomach clench. But there was no turning back now. Are you sure about this? Lainey asked quietly as they packed up the evidence. Once you do this, Haverford will come at you with everything he's got. Ida straightened her shoulders. Let him try. I'm not afraid anymore. She looked at the faces of her supporters, her daughter, Reed, and Sarah, each bringing their own strengths to the fight. Besides, I'm not alone. Reed stayed behind after the others left, helping Ida prepare her statement for the next day. His calm presence helped steady her nerves as they worked on finding the right words to convey the truth she needed to share. No, he said. I've seen a lot of people back down when faced with this kind of pressure. But you just get stronger. Ida managed a small smile. I'm just stubborn, I guess. My daddy always said I was like a tree in a storm. The harder the wind blows, the deeper my roots go. As night fell, Ida reviewed their preparation one final time. The evidence was organized. The presentation was ready, and her allies were in place. Tomorrow, she would walk into that country club not as a victim, but as someone ready to expose the truth, no matter the cost. She touched the singed edge of one of her photographs, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. But instead of breaking her, their escalating attacks had only strengthened her resolve. The time for defense was over. Tomorrow, she would take the fight directly to Troy Haverford's door. The Cedar Mesa Country Club buzzed with excitement as prospective buyers and local dignitaries gathered for Haverford Development's model home unveiling. Crystal champagne flutes clinked while Troy Haverford, dressed in an impeccable gray suit, worked the room with practiced charm. Ladies and gentlemen, Haverford announced from a small podium, welcome to the future of Cedar Mesa. Behind him, a large screen displayed glossy renders of luxury homes. Just then, Ida Pennington strode through the entrance, flanked by Reed and Sarah with her news camera rolling. The determined set of Ida's jaw caught Haverford's attention, and his smile faltered slightly. Mr. Haverford, Ida's voice carried across the room. I think these good people deserve to see the real way you do business. Before Haverford could respond, Sarah connected her equipment to the presentation system. The screen flickered, and suddenly everyone was watching nighttime footage from Ida's trail camera. Bryce Lathrop appeared clearly, spreading bait around Ida's porch. The timestamps were crystal clear. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the footage continued, showing Bryce setting the illegal trap, the code officer's truck in the background. Then came the devastating sequence from the night of the fire, with Bryce skulking around just before the flames erupted. That's all staged, Haverford declared. But his usual polish had cracked. His eyes darted to the exit, where Bryce stood. Bryce turned and bolted, but Reed was ready. He tackled the bigger man, sending them both sprawling across the manicured lawn. To deputies, alerted earlier by Sarah, rushed forward to make the arrest. Out inside, the code officer tried to slip away through the kitchen, but another deputy intercepted him. Going somewhere, Jim? The deputy asked, pulling out handcuffs. Haverford's face had gone ashen as he watched his allies being led away in handcuffs. The prospective buyers were already heading for the exits, their interest in Cedar Mesa luxury homes thoroughly extinguished. You were willing to kill innocent animals and burn down my home, Ida said, her voice steady. All to force me and my neighbors to sell out. A detective stepped forward, notebook in hand. Mr. Haverford, we'll need you to come down to the station. to answer some questions about your involvement in conspiracy and arson. The empire Haverford had built through intimidation and corruption was crumbling before everyone's eyes. His mask of respectability had finally slipped, revealing the truth Ida had fought so hard to expose. In the weeks following Haverford's arrest, justice moved swiftly through the small town of Cedar Mesa. The district attorney, armed with Ida's evidence and testimony from multiple victims of Haverford's schemes, built an airtight case. The investigation revealed a pattern of corruption that stretched back years, with dozens of homeowners forced out through similar tactics. On a crisp morning in early October, Ida sat in the courthouse, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap as the judge delivered the verdict. Haverford, along with Bryce and the corrupt code officer, faced multiple felony charges. The sentence included substantial prison time and, most importantly for Ida, mandatory restitution to repair the damage they'd caused. The court orders the defendant to pay full restitution for damages to the Pennington property, the judge declared, his voice firm and clear. Furthermore, all development permits obtained through fraudulent means are hereby revoked. Lainey, sitting beside her mother, squeezed Ida's hand. The gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come since those first tense discussions about the Bobcat on the porch. What had started as a point of conflict between them had become the catalyst for healing their relationship. After the hearing, they stood together on the courthouse steps. The autumn sun caught the silver in Ida's hair as she spoke to the gathered reporters. This isn't just about my home, she said, her voice steady and sure. It's about standing up to bullies who think they can push people around. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can make the biggest difference. Reed stood quietly to the side, his presence a steady comfort as it had been throughout the ordeal. His eyes met Ida's, and the pride in his gaze warmed her more than the morning sun. The restitution funds arrived quickly, and the work to rebuild Ida's porch began immediately. The construction crew worked efficiently, but Ida insisted on overseeing every detail. This time, the porch would be even better than before, wider, stronger, with comfortable rocking chairs where she could sit and watch the desert sunset. You know, Lainey said one evening, as they sat among the sawdust and construction materials, sharing sandwiches with the workers, I used to think you were just being stubborn about this place, but now I understand. Ida looked at her daughter, seeing not the frustrated woman who'd initially questioned her judgment, but someone who had grown to appreciate the power of standing one's ground. Sometimes being stubborn is just another word for knowing what matters, she replied softly. The real celebration came 2 weeks later, when Reed arrived with his wildlife team to release the Bobcat and her kittens. During their recovery, the young family had been cared for at a local wildlife sanctuary, growing stronger and ready for their return to the wild. The release site was carefully chosen, a protected stretch of desert land that would never face the threat of development. Ida, Lainey, and Reed watched from a respectful distance as the carriers were opened. The mother Bobcat emerged first, cautious but confident, her sleek form a testament to her restored health. Her kittens tumbled out after her, their playful energy a sharp contrast to their previous trapped state. They're going to be just fine, Reed assured them, his hand finding its way to the small of Ida's back. The touch was gentle, tentative, but full of promise. The Bobcat family disappeared into the brush, but not before the mother turned to look back at them. For a moment, her amber eyes met Ida's, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared resilience. As they walked back to their vehicles, Reed paused at the property line. You know, he said, turning to Ida, I've been thinking about setting up a more permanent wildlife monitoring station in this area. We could use someone with your observational skills. Ida felt her cheeks warm, and not just from the desert sun. Are you offering me a job? Mr. Talbot, more like a partnership, he replied, his hand reaching for hers. Their fingers intertwined naturally, comfortably, as if they'd been doing this for years rather than mere moments. Lainey, watching from a few steps away, couldn't hide her smile. Her mother had emerged from this ordeal not diminished but transformed, stronger, more confident, and open to new possibilities. The following Sunday, Ida hosted a small gathering on her newly rebuilt porch. The hardware store, where she worked, had closed early so her co-workers could attend, and several neighbors brought dishes to share. Even Sarah, the reporter who had helped expose Haverford's schemes, stopped by with her camera crew to document the community's recovery. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, Ida stood at the porch railing. The wooden boards beneath her feet were new, but they already felt like home. From her vantage point, she could see the spot where the Bobcat had first appeared, the garden where she'd found the illegal trap, and the corner where Reed now stood, deep in conversation with Lainey about local wildlife conservation efforts. Mom, Lainey called, waving her over. Reed's talking about starting a community workshop series on desert wildlife. I think the hardware store might be interested in sponsoring it. I'd join them. Noting how naturally Lainey and Reed had begun working together, planning for the future. Her daughter had moved from skeptic to advocate, not just for wildlife, but for the kind of principled stand Ida had taken. We could use the store's community room, Ida suggested, warming to the idea. Maybe start with basic wildlife awareness. Help people understand they don't need to fear their wild neighbors. Reed's eyes crinkled with approval. Exactly what I was thinking. Though I might need a co-presenter who knows something about standing up to actual predators. The laughter that followed was genuine, healing, the kind that comes after surviving something difficult together. As the evening progressed, Ida found herself surrounded by the people who had become more than just neighbors or colleagues. They were her community, strengthened rather than divided by the challenges they'd faced later. After the guests had gone and Lainey had headed home with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Ida and Reed stood at the property line once more. The desert night was settling in, bringing with it a chorus of cricket songs and the distant call of a great horned owl. I never thought standing my ground would lead to all this, Ida mused, gesturing to encompass not just her rebuilt porch, but the deeper changes in her life. Reed's hand found hers again, their fingers linking naturally. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest stands, he said softly. You showed everyone that one person's courage can make a difference. In the distance, a familiar form moved through the desert brush, the Bobcat passing through. On her nightly rounds, she was no longer a threat or a victim, but a reminder of how things had changed. The sight brought a smile to Ida's face. You know what the hardware store's slogan used to be? She asked Reed. Building better homes. I think maybe we need to add in stronger communities to that. Reed's answering squeeze of her hand said, more than words could. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the desert landscape they had fought to protect. Ida Pennington had entered this battle as a widow, a hardware store clerk whom others had underestimated. She emerged as something more, a defender of home and habitat, a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves, and a woman who had found unexpected strength in standing her ground. Her transformed porch was more than just a rebuilt structure. It was a symbol of resilience, of community, and of the power of unwavering principles. As she and Reed finally turned toward her house, their hands still clasped, Ida felt a deep sense of rightness. Her home was restored, her family bond strengthened, and her heart opened to new possibilities. The woman who had once been dismissed as stubborn and unreasonable was now recognized as a pillar of her community, someone who had stood firm when it mattered most and emerged triumphant. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.